The big question is this: how do we take a seemingly ordinary world and make it beyond extraordinary? In yoga, there is so much more than meets the eye, and it's not just the things we do on our yoga mats that make the biggest difference. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name is Austin Bitsis, and welcome to Life as a Secret Yogi. You either create your world or your world creates you. Wake up every morning and remember when you were healthy, happy, and victorious. How did you feel? What does it feel like to create that in your body? Welcome everyone to Life as a Secret Yogi. We are going to lock in an hour or so, and of course, as always, following this episode will be a separate episode with a guided meditation kindly provided by today's guest, Liz Corwin. She takes us through an amazing visual meditation to end our conversation off on a balanced note, calming our minds and calming our bodies. We hear the word grounding thrown around a lot by fellow yoga hashtaggers like myself, but what really is grounding? Grounding is just another name for the action of settling our minds to reconnect with the present moment. There are tons of grounding techniques, but what they all have in common is that they all help us deal with stress, overwhelm, and anxiety. Hence, why we hear the word thrown around a lot is because these feelings are simply human. If it is getting out in nature, practicing gratitude, practicing asana, or doing Liz Corwin's meditation in the next episode, these things would be defined as grounding. So I hope this helps because honestly, when I first heard the term being thrown around a lot and popularized, it was kind of frustrating because no one really just simplified it in layman's terms. And as someone with both a skeptical and analytical mind, I'm hesitant to just follow anything. Okay, after that tangent, it's been about a week since I spoke with Liz Corwin, and I really wanted her conversation to soak in. A few things that stood out from our conversation was that yoga is something bigger than ourselves. This really resonated with me because when creating the Secret Yogi Society, it was with the intention that our actions are contagious. Therefore, if we don't gain control over our thoughts and actions in a positive way for ourselves, then do it for all those we come in contact with. Something we also spoke about was overcoming the hurdles of a first-time experience. Trying to encourage others we care about to practice good decisions is something extremely difficult because we want to help, yet we also don't want to push people and ruin relationships. This goes for not only discovering the universal benefits of daily yoga practice, but also adopting healthy habits such as improving your diet or sleep and trying to share with those we love. Liz and I talk about this one thing to deal with overcoming the first-time experience, which we will talk about this and a lot more in this episode, so make sure you listen to the end. But quickly, before we jump into this episode, a quick section I like to call I Wish We Were Sponsored By. So as of today, we are still a new show and need to find creative ways to help financially support this show. So what better way than to provide more free value? Therefore, today I'm pumped to share a book that changed the way I look at sleep. It's called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. This book was extremely influential in showing me the research of why I needed and why we all need to prioritize sleep. Sleep has a profound impact on our thoughts and therefore our lives. Personally, I notice I find myself a little down and less positive in my thoughts when I have a poor night's sleep. Sleep is one of those non-negotiables, not only for myself, but also pretty much all the secret yogis on this show. If you want to learn more or need to be convinced, check this book out for sure. Again, it's called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. As always, you don't have to, but of course, if you use the affiliate link in the show notes below, it would be greatly appreciated, as all the proceeds go directly back into supporting the show. And hey, as the show grows, we can even get Dr. Matthew Walker on as a guest and find out about his life as a secret yogi. So without further ado, enjoy this amazing conversation with our guest, Liz Corwin. Liz Corwin travels the world teaching and spreading the message of yoga. She is a storyteller and the creator of Walkabout Yoga. She runs international adventure yoga retreats, offers extensive online courses, and has a 200-hour training program for all you want to be yoga teachers out there. What really makes Liz a secret yogi is she has been a U.S. Navy officer and former F-18 Navy jet pilot for over 15 years now. She has also been featured in the New York Times, the Yoga Journal magazine, and partnered with Gaem to create free online video series for military warriors. Liz has also worked with the Give Back Yoga Foundation, and she is the cover model for the Beryl Bender Birch book, Yoga for Warriors, and an ambassador for the woman-owned yoga brand Kira Grace. Began teaching yoga while on deployment in 2008 aboard the aircraft carrier, sharing her practice and experience with other pilots and friends. Liz's dynamic, challenging yoga classes, courses, and storytelling focuses on intuitive physical transition, alchemizing lead into gold through deep inner shadow work, and embracing vulnerability to unleash self-acceptance, self-love, and healing. And Liz, that's an absolute incredible bio. So really,
It sounds so wonderful. Thanks for reading that.
Yeah. And I'm really grateful to have you on the show. And I'll say it again. Take us back to the journey, say a year before you got deployed in 2008. Why yoga? Why the Navy?
Yeah, it's funny. The bio you just read, it's like, that seems like a lifetime ago in 2007, a year prior. So I was similar to you, Austin. I was an athlete most of my life. I was competitive. I pushed myself in most of the physical sports that I did. And, I'd heard about the yoga thing. I tried it out a few times. I have this is called the secret yogi. So let's get right into it.
Mhm.
I skipped shavasana for the first 5 years that I practiced. I would show up late to class and I would leave early those first few years of practicing yoga because I didn't have time for it. I had to get back on the treadmill and do my thing. So when I actually discovered, while I was going through Navy flight school, how stressed out and overly competitive my life had become in many ways, and you were always under a microscope, and everything was only as good as the last good thing you did, and so if you made a mistake, you were that mistake in everything that you did. If you did something well, everybody highlighted it. And so it really, just that hyper stress level and anxiety. I found a yoga studio. I was practicing in Meridian, Mississippi, and it was the first time, I'll never forget those first few times I stayed for shavasana, and I was like, this is nice. This is a nice place to just be and have people not judge. And especially, I think at that time, the internal dialogue and the internal judgment that was taking place in everything I did, because that's what the military was breeding me for in some ways, right? When you're alone in the cockpit, or when you're alone doing any kind of mission operationally, they need you to be hardest on yourself. And so that gets so deeply instilled in everything that you do, almost perfectionist quality. Counterbalance that, I started this yoga practice and deepening it. And again, I'd been practicing for maybe 4 or 5 years before that first time I stayed for shavasana. I didn't know what was happening at the time. I couldn't have put the words that I can use now into it. I just knew that something at the end of that practice shifted. Something moved. I didn't know what, I didn't know how to explain it, but something was shifting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can resonate with that, skipping shavasana when they get started.
I teach now, and I don't mind if my students come late. I don't mind if my students leave early. I have such an appreciation for meeting people where they are when they come to yoga, that the thing that I think of as a yoga teacher, just sharing it with the world, is just get people to come back. Even if it's not to your class, even if it's not to my class, just get them to show back up. And so how do we open up that lens to just make it something that people will be willing to come back and try again?
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely. And then also, like, through that journey, I'm sure just from what you're saying now, you've transformed emotionally as a person, being in the Navy, and then also starting off in integrating yoga into your journey at a similar time. How have you transformed emotionally during your journey? And also, were there any dark points along your journey? Were there any points of, say, just
there's been
obstacles?
dark points. There's been, I think that's the one thing that when we start this here's another secret is yoga is not meant to make us happy, right? Like yoga is not meant to just be this band-aid that we can put on something and hide now in the light. Every single time that we come back into the light, as I like to call it, it's another opportunity to go back into the darkness and go back into the shadow and re-examine. And then we go back into the darkness and then we come back into the light again, a different person. So for me, it's a very cyclical kind of cycle that takes place throughout our lives, the way I see it. And it's never just about staying in the light all the time, right? Because we're human. And so we always carry these baggage. We always have this trauma. We always have these things that we're each trying to process and dig through and excavate through within ourselves. But of course, yes, coming back to the light and then going back into it. And yeah, throughout these years, it's I've been doing yoga now practicing for 18 or 19 years. And to this day, I mean, it still is like every time you get on the mat, every single day, what am I going to find today? What woman or man am I going to encounter? What are their crazy thoughts going to be? And how do I start to integrate that again into just more understanding and self-awareness so that we know the pieces that are still in the dark that we can shine a spotlight on and bring into the light and better understand. So, some of I've talked about this one before, and I like using this story because it's pretty much one of the darkest days of my entire life. It was one of those moments where you question everything that you are and everything that you think you'll be. And the identity gets stripped away so quickly. And during the process, it feels like, again, the most painful thing of your entire life. And yet oftentimes those wounds become our biggest gifts.
Yeah.
And so for me, one of those experiences was when I had a midair collision when I was on an operation over Afghanistan many years ago. And I've spoken about this, not many times actually in interviews. This is probably only the third time I've really talked about this. And it took me many years to be able to get to the point of expressing it in a healthy way versus just vomiting your own healing. Do you know what I mean? So oftentimes I find that with storytelling, you need to give enough space away from the event so that you have actually processed all the emotions that went with it, and better share it later on. And so this midair collision, my wingman and I hit, and we were over a place that, we didn't really want to crash into and land and be found by anyone.
There's no good place to crash.
Let's just say that moment of realization of what had happened and those first few seconds that felt like a lifetime afterwards of, oh my gosh, am I okay? First of all, am I alive? Is my friend alive? Are we still able to fly? And then the deepest part of that was actually, it took me an hour to fly back to the aircraft carrier alone at this point.
Oh, wow. So the plane was still intact or?
After the collision. So that hour of against yourself in that moment, right? You are neck deep in analyzing who you are, what you did, how you could have done it better, picking apart all those pieces of yourself. Who will I be after this? Will I ever fly again? What is my identity now? What my ego, all of those pieces. And I often talk about that 1 hour as kind of one of those moments that yoga, I didn't know it at the time. I wasn't practicing yoga in the jet. But what I had learned up until that point in my yoga practice was that perfection is not, it's completely imperfect because it's impossible. And learning to find self-love when you're at your deepest point of self-attack, that for me, that 1 hour of really just coming to terms with what had happened, what would happen, the replay that you make of what took place and what might occur. That might is such a big piece, I think, sometimes in terms of our levels of anxiety as human beings, right? Because we play out all of these scenarios, these worst case scenarios that can come in. And what yoga teaches us is to, come back into the present. What's actually happening right now? Yes, there's a past. Yes, there's a future. But we can't really control either of those in many ways sometimes, except for in the present moment. And so in that hour, I just remember coming back in the present moment and telling myself, enjoy this. enjoy this last moment, whether you'll fly again or not, or who knows what'll happen. And that time that it took me to get back to the aircraft carrier, no, by the way, then I had to land the jet and keep my right mind enough to not, lose it in those final moments of like, okay, great, now you're back at the carrier, and every single person on that carrier knows what's happened and is waiting for you to land, right? Like everybody, like 5,000 people are waiting for you. Don't screw it up now, right? Like just whatever you do, don't screw up the landing at this point. Just get it right. So for me, that has been one of my deepest emotional, and for many years after that, dealing with what happened and processing it. And like we talked about, kind of going into the shadows of it and then bringing it back into the light in many ways. So yeah, I think
I think that's definitely a dark moment. And also on the end of your next flight and your flight after that, it's like those thoughts are running through your head of like, now what if, because it's that scenario of like, this could now happen. So it's like those thoughts are playing through your head of the past. So you're a lot of times you're focusing on the past, and you're trying to say positive for the future and the present.
Yeah, all of this is kind of, they just pull you out of where you actually are, right? And when we get pulled out of where we are, that's when we get in those, I like to call them like those lost highway trains of thought, where we just think of something and then it reminds us of something else, and then it reminds us of something else, and then it reminds us of something else, and the next thing we know, we're thinking about something we have no idea how we got there, and it's stressing us out. And we're like, what, this isn't even happening at the moment.
Yeah, I think we could all agree that our minds are fragmented in getting pulled in many different directions. And then, so as yoga as a state of union with the mind and the body, and is often associated with nonviolence, and the Navy being a branch of the nation's armed services, did you ever feel a disconnect? They seem like opposites, but I know there's a correlation. So, and I know you definitely felt that there was most likely a correlation, but did you feel any disconnect?
I one thing I will say is I strongly believe that we, as human beings with our little smart little brains, can convince ourselves of anything. So I just like to put that out there to people, right? We convince ourselves of anything we want to all the time. In light of that, there is a little bit of a disconnect in the sense of some of the outwardly appearing tenets of yoga, right? Very simple to say, nonviolence. When we think of those things, though, sometimes I like to peel back the layer on them. One of the other tenets is Satya, or truth, right? Mm-hmm. Yet, when we talk about the gates of speech, is it true? Is it relevant? Does it need to be heard, right? Is it the right timing? Yeah. And so we go through all these things throughout our lives, which is very compartmentalized, of nothing is black and white, right? Truth doesn't just mean tell the truth all the time, when maybe a truth is going to hurt somebody so significantly they might never recover, right? So we are always, as human beings, asked to kind of navigate that gray area. When I think of nonviolence, when I think of the military, when I think of some of those things that seem to be polar opposites, we could get into a whole segment probably about the military and what it does, and people take it apart one way or the other. But there's a purpose of it. And let's just, at the end of the day, there is a purpose. There is a reason that we have militaries. It would be great if, we didn't necessarily need to take it to that level all the time. But I think we often forget that the military is an extension, especially in this country, of politics and the people. So it's not even something that we can say, oh, that person is in the military, right? And I'm just a civilian at home. I didn't do it. It's not on me. No, this is our country. This is all of us wrong, and this is right. Maybe someday we will get to the point where that idealistic place is a possibility, but as of right now, it's not. And so when I think of it in that regard, there are a lot of tenets, and I've shared this in blogs before, that I think are very similar. And I think that we forget the military is a place where there are standards that are held that we couldn't hold in our normal day-to-day society and civilian life, because there's an expectation of how people are supposed to act and behave that actually is upheld. There's a deeper kind of value to some of those pieces. And for me, I found that, my yoga practice represented that too in many ways. There were it was something more. It was something bigger than ourselves that we would practice for or set intentions to. It was something bigger than the individual that you were connected to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I talk about that. I've talked about discipline, right? The yoga practice really teaches us the mental discipline. I mean, when I first started practicing yoga, oh my gosh, my meditation practice was nothing, right? Like, the girl that couldn't stay for Shavasana, there's no way she was going to meditate. It's pretty much taken me like 10 or 15 years to figure out how to show up and try again and be okay with not doing it perfectly and not doing it right. But that discipline to just show up and try. And there's a lot of love that's in both of them as well. So yeah, I've never felt a huge riff in that regard. Now, I do prefer that at the end of the day, we wouldn't need to do some of the things we do, but it's a product again of politics and where we are right now in our society. So,
but it's definitely good to have your perspective on it as somebody who's been on both sides and been on both sides at the same time. So it's really interesting to have that perspective. And then you created Walkabout Yoga with the intention to get them, being veterans, to walk back into the yoga studio, which I read in your New York Times article, or New York Times article featuring you. And statistics show that nearly 50% of all veterans will experience some form of PTSD that affect not only their well-being, but also the well-being of their loved ones. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that is not mentioned, depression or some other forms of PTSD that these veterans are going through. Why, in your own words, did you create Walkabout Yoga?
As well, start to share your practice or start to share these interviews and start to connect with people. You're pulled into things that you might never have thought that you'd be doing. Mm-hmm. And for me, teaching veterans and a lot of military was something that I didn't really search for, but kind of kept landing in my lap a lot. And I started to realize that I had, because of my story, because of my background, and because of my love of yoga, I had this very unique position that I had the opportunity to be an insider, as you could call it, with many of the military members to share yoga, right? If a lot of them don't want to necessarily go to a yoga studio, because guess what? Again, there's a lot of type A personalities. We're used to doing things right. We don't want to show up someplace where all of a sudden we can't do what everybody else is doing. And I found so many veterans not going to yoga studios a lot of the time because of that, right? Because of that little hurdle to get over of that first time experience. And Walkabout Yoga kind of came about for many reasons. I love to travel and I love interacting with other people. I find that so much of what we learn about ourselves, we learn through those around us and by interacting with them as well. And so Walkabout Yoga is really about kind of stepping out and then stepping back in and coming back home every single time. And again, with the military traveling, you're always uprooted. There's really no home besides the one that you carry with you a lot of the time, or you recreate every 2 or 3 years. So I've never really lived anywhere for longer than about 2 or 3 years. In the last 20 years of my life. And so that's kind of where Walkabout started. And it had a lot of different branches of it. And like I said, this military thing just kept kind of calling me in. And I kept finding opportunities where people wanted me to teach it here or there with veterans. And you touched on something I think that's really important. And that's that idea that we think of PTSD as, Vietnam vets or World War II vets or this older generation of understanding of what a veteran is. I mean, it's weird to even think of myself as a veteran because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm young, right? Like we have this image of like what this like scruffy old veteran should look like and be like. And we have all of these young 19, 20-year-old kids as well that are veterans, getting out after 2 years or whatever their minimum time of service, 4 years sometimes. And we think of PTSD as something that is, or PTS, as some people refer to it, as something that is only for if you've been a veteran, and in war and all these. And that's just simply not true. Day to day, every single human being butts up against traumas and triggers in their life. And many of us day to day are triggered in those ways with PTS, post-traumatic stress. Something that occurs, triggers us, takes us back into reliving a previous moment, right? And everything physiologically that happens within us at that moment becomes the past experience. And we literally are transmitted back into that old physicality and way of being and stress level. in our present body. And so I think I just wanted to mention real quick, I think it's really important that we think of this idea of PTS as not something that just occurs, like I said, in wartime, but as something that occurs from any kind of trauma, any kind of day-to-day things that happen to everybody, not just in the military. But yes, in the military, there is a level of exposure to some of those things that the practice of yoga and coming back into the present moment in this body and starting to kind of stir the pot and bring up some of those maybe stagnant emotions, stagnant feelings, stagnant trauma, stagnant triggers, that we can bring it up in a safe space and then work through it and process it. And now I would like to point out there are many different resources out there, depending on the level for veterans, if they do have PTSD or if they, don't have PTSD and yet still have these traumas and triggers in the body, which again, we all have coming up. Yoga, I think, it's been such a beautiful tool I've found to get us back into the present moment with our breath, to take us out of the past. And of course, especially for veterans, that's a great extra, like I said, tool to have in their toolkit, but for anybody, really.
Yeah, and definitely. And that was kind of leading on to my next question, where for Walkabout Yoga, was it the physical or the emotional benefits for both you and your students did you feel had the greatest impact? Like the mental or the physical side? Because I know a lot of people are dealing with things on both physical that are affecting their emotional, and then both emotional that is resulting in physical ailments. But did you feel that the physical side of the asanas in your yoga practice, or was it more of the mental, bringing people back to the present?
So I use the body as a tool to get to the emotions and to get to the deeper layers, which means that I teach and this is what I was kind of referring to before, there are so many different resources and so many different styles of teaching for veterans these days and for military in general. The way I teach it basically is pushing people to a level of physicality. And I like letting them burn a sweat. Sometimes when I'm teaching military, there might be a curse word that slips out. I have to meet them in that space of that physically demanding, what we're usually used to. And I like to challenge so that once people, one of my favorite teachers taught me this, but once people trust you with their bodies, then only then will they start to trust you with their emotions, with their spirituality, with all these other pieces and aspects of who we are. But first we have to get them to trust us with their bodies. So that is step one, is on that mat and in that room, is to get people to trust you in movement. The way that I explained when I first found yoga, I didn't know what was happening, but I knew something in the physical nature of it was shifting something for me. If you had mentioned spirit or emotions back then, I would have shut down and I would have walked out, right? And so for me, when I'm teaching in those spaces, I use the physical nature of the asanas. But then by the end of class, it's about starting to slowly slip in those little nuggets of surrender and healing and softening and letting go and the breath work. So for me, it's about getting people in their bodies first on their mat. And then once they show up for themselves and they already start to feel the difference and they trust in that difference, only then can you really start taking it to those other deeper levels of what we can do to process out some of what is bubbling up to the surface as we use our bodies to stimulate and bring the things that are stagnant back into movement and then release them. So I think that yes, they're getting a physical workout in some ways and processing things, but for me, it's more about using that physicality, again, to find that union back into themselves and back into that place on the mat of a place of safety and security and letting themselves off the hook. And again, that thing that I can't emphasize enough, just self-love and self. Yeah.
I totally agree. And it was kind of a trick question because I think the physical aspect of yoga attracts so many people, especially now with all the different studios, the hot yoga, the new studio popping up around every corner. I think it's great because, I know that's how I got started, and that might be also the same of how you got started, skipping the shavasana and just going for the physical practice.
Yeah.
And then it's like, even just through doing the physical practice, you feel such like a relief and this sensation that you're like, I want more of this. And what is this? And you kind of peel back the onion and you realize that there's so much more to yoga. It's only what 1/8 of yoga. And that aspect has gotten me into my journey. And I still have an extremely physical practice. And I know you have extremely physical practice as well. And I think that's great in the sense of where yoga is right now, being a very physical practice with the studios, because it opens the door up for so many people to learn the other aspects if they're wanting to. The information is there, the resources are there.
I think something that we often, I've got three kind of comments to that. Something we often forget as teachers or, just as students is we want to add so much into the classes sometimes, right? With themes or peak poses or all these other pieces. And I had a teacher tell me this once, and everything I'm saying is from another teacher at some point, but I had a teacher tell me once, when you're having an off day, just teach the poses. Just teach the poses, and the poses will teach the student, right? And so they do. Like, I mean, if you're having a day where you're not feeling inspired, you got nothing to say, and you're kind of you're flatlined yourself a little bit. Teach the poses, get back to the basics, and the asanas will take people on that transformative journey on their own. I also wanted to mention that this idea of the physicality, right? Like you just mentioned, so many studios now it's about arm balances and handstands and this and that. We are a very hyperactive society. We need a lot of extra ways to discharge that energy.
Mm-hmm.
So I call my classes all levels, whether you can stand and stay in a handstand or not, because at the end of the day, some of us that need to take it into that more physical nature, if you want to call it that, it's just because we've got more that we need to discharge, more that we need to get out before we can find that place of surrender.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
I
yeah.
sorry to cut you off. I
No.
totally agree with that. And at the same time, it's like also giving the students a little bit of what they want and then also giving them what they need. And I find that with myself where it's like, I really want a physical practice, but some days and some times I just need more of a restorative practice. Maybe I've been pushing myself too hard, certain asanas in the sense of like handstands and maybe my hands hurting or my wrist or my elbow. And it's like, I really need something more restorative, but at the same time, it's like giving them a little bit of what they want, but then what they need. And it's like, I
Yeah.
love that saying. So
It's true. Yeah. And honestly, for me, I love handstands. I love being upside down. That's, called pilot, whatever. I like being inverted still, right? But for me, the handstands, whatever your pose might be, right? Whatever poses that call to you that you just love practicing, there's a reason, right? That some of these poses are calling us at different points in our life. We go through different poses that we kind of have little crushes on, let's call them, or whatnot. But for me, the handstand isn't always an ego trip of oh, I need to do a handstand today.
mhm.
When I find myself in handstand sometimes, for me, because it's a place I like to be, it's a real check-in of what my current state is. Some days I can't hold it at all. Some days I can. Sometimes I feel like a lead weight in the pose. Sometimes I feel light. And often our asana practice becomes a reflection, very much so, of whatever's going in that day with us. And so whatever pose it is that helps you shine the light on, oh, this is what I'm feeling today. I wonder where this is coming from or whatnot. So be it,
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that on multiple different levels. And just, I guess, to take a step back for when we were talking about teaching, like how do you deal with skepticism for those who have never tried yoga or tried it once and didn't like it? I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of that over your years of teaching, especially with different audiences. How do you deal with that skepticism and that image of yoga, I guess what people think yoga is,
Right.
and kind of like introducing that?
So yeah, you said that question, and the first thing I thought of was social media, right? The
Yeah.
first thing I thought of was, let's face it, I'm younger, not super young, but I'm a young white female that weighs 118 pounds, right? There's this stigma of what that image needs to be and if I'm, a 210-pound guy in my 50s, Like, I shouldn't be doing that, right?
Mhm.
And of course, in the military, I meet people of all sizes and experience levels and whatnot. And so, yeah, you get that like, well, that's not for me kind of thing, or the that's just for young hippie chicks like you, right? And what I found was there's two sides of this. When I was teaching military, the basics of the practice, again, just the basic asanas, let the asanas do the work. Get them, if they just show up, offer it free. I was teaching on base, and I think it was like it was like a SEAL base, right? Boat team guy, like just hardcore dudes, right? And we had a class going, there were about 20 of them. And the yoga class was right in the middle of this huge gym, their whole gym, right? So all these SEAL guys are working out around this group of dudes that's doing yoga. And one of them asked, he called to his buddy, like, hey, why don't you join us for yoga? And one of the SEAL guys was like, yeah, yoga? It's like, yeah, right. And I looked up at the dude. Of course, I'm like 5'5". I stare straight up into his eyes. And I'm like, what are you afraid of, big guy? And it wasn't very yoga of me to call him out. But at the same time, I was like, what is this fear, right? That to get this guy on the mat. What I would say to that is give people time. Give people patience, give people space. Don't force it down their throats, right? Like, be yoga, be the experience. Show them what it's about and who you are and how you live and how you express yourself and the truth of who you are and your vulnerability. And for me, a lot, it's about exposure. Like, here's the behind the curtain. Here's the behind the scenes of like what goes on, the truth. Because people resonate with that authenticity. And that is how you get people that have never tried yoga onto the mat, I think. Another way, which is why I was teaching the way I was with the military, was to take it out of the studio and to take it to them. I would have people take some classes sometimes, and they'd be like, Liz, they'd pull me aside afterwards, and everybody wants to come to you one-on-one because they don't want any of their buddies to see them like talking to you either, right? Because like they gotta
Yeah.
whisper in your ear, hey, that was kind of cool. Like, where can I do this again alone or something? And that's actually why I'm an ambassador with the Give Back Yoga Foundation, and we partnered with Gaiam to create those online videos and they're free. They're on YouTube. They're called like Yoga for Warriors and stuff, but it's anybody could do them, and they're just free on YouTube. But we created those videos so people could try things out at home in the comfort and the privacy of their own space with that skepticism. And so nobody has to see them. Nobody has to question.
Yes, true
But yeah,
secret yogis right there.
yeah, so it's true. It's all the
Acquire
secret
them
yogi. And the
overnight.
other piece of that is, again, like, just give people space. Don't force them. Don't try to convince them in anything, right? This isn't just about yoga. This is anything. If you live your truth of what you believe in, the people, it's going to find them when they need to find it, I think, is a really important thing. I made the mistake once of taking someone with me to a yoga class that was a very intense yoga class, and then they wouldn't do it for about 5 years. And I felt horrible, right? Like, I thought I had just ruined this person to ever coming back to the yoga studio. Well, guess what? It might have taken them 5 years, and those 5 years were painful for me, feeling like a horrible person, but they tried again and they went again. So I would say just give people space, give people time. If they're meant to find it, they're meant to find it. And if they're not, then they're not for now. They're on a different
Yeah.
journey, and who am I to understand or judge that journey of where they are?
So true. And to show by example too. They see you living
Yeah.
authentically and the improvements and the positivity you have. It's very true. I would love to dig into your dharma, and I quote from you, it is to lead myself and others towards fearless exploration, raw curiosity, pure self-acceptance, fierce intuition, sacred rebellion, feral spirit, and ferocious love. And that is beautiful and poetically said. Can you take us through this? And how do you live this with authenticity? So, kind of like, just like how we were just speaking about living authentically and showing through example, how do you live your vision, your dharma authentically?
It's for me, it's 38 years of, excuse my language, but fuck ups. I mean, that is what that dharma was written from. And in 10 years, it might be a little bit different. I don't think it probably will change much. I feel like with where my experiences, and we all have our own unique experiences of that have brought us to a point where there's certain things that we just won't accept anymore from ourselves, and there's certain things that we know that we want to cultivate more of. Self-love and self-acceptance is a huge one for me, and this fearless idea of kind of stepping into that and into that intuition. I work with a wonderful woman, and I mentioned her, I think, in the comments before that I'd emailed you ahead of time, but her name's Annette Hulefeld, and I work with her weekly. We do dream work. We do tarot. We do natal chart reading. She's a clinical counselor and psychotherapist as well, but we do kind of both sides, right? We do the woo-woo world, and then we do the okay, what's really going on in the psychology part of the your thoughts and brain and where you are. And that kind of work has, for me, brought me to that list that you just read out. Mm. And every single week when I speak to her or when we work together, or I am allowed to kind of be in that safe space of complete exposure of going through and dissecting pieces of the ego and that control that we each have of what we're trying to constantly manage and control in our lives, of how we want to be seen by the world. For me, all of that comes down to one thing, and that's this checking back in with my own humility of where am I today? Where am I still not seeing? Like what is it within me that I'm still not able to get out of my own way of? And that, again, process of just going excavation of that and shining the light on all those pieces is, I guess, yeah, that is my dharma. That at the end of the day, that's in 20 years and 30 years, unless I'm doing that internally, I don't have anything to offer my students, right? Unless I'm doing that for me, there's nothing I can give, because only by doing those things do I remember this letting myself off the hook, this ability to let go of perfectionism, this ability to let go of what I think I'm supposed to be doing or how I think I'm supposed to be showing up and show up more authentically. So for me, I guess I would say that the way that I show up with that in the world is just by constantly turning back inward. I don't know any other better way to put it.
You put it pretty poetically and beautifully. So I think you did a good job. From
Yeah.
the quote I read off your website of your dharma. So I don't think you could put it too much better. But just, I guess the next thing is just like overall lifestyle habits to living a long, vibrant life. So I know you speak about like your non-negotiables, your maybe it's your daily practice, maybe it's your meditation, your sleep routine, sacred space, your diet. What is it like? Just kind of like take us like quickly through how you like your non-negotiables.
My non-negotiables are pretty. I need the physical. Like you were saying, you're a runner. There's something that is just ingrained in you. If I don't have that, you don't want to be around me, kind of thing, right? Like we've all heard that quote, like I do yoga so that I'm not an asshole, kind of thing. Like, right? That's a must. The last few years, I would say the last 2 or 3 years, meditation has become huge for me, especially for kind of body scanning and finding where I'm holding on to tension or where it is that I'm not releasing and I'm not open that day, and checking in and keeping that awareness throughout the rest of my day. So yeah, my yoga practice, my meditation, music. I need it's some one way or another. Music needs to come in. Nature. I have driftwood. I love driftwood. I have driftwood in my home. I love nature. I bring it into my home. That's really important for me too. And I also believe that if you love something, buy it, right? If there is something that you love, buy it. Maybe you don't spend any other money on anything else for the rest of the month, fine. But like if you see that one little sculpture somewhere that just makes your internal space magical and sets that intention, that stage for what you're surrounding yourselves with, buy it. Right? So
well, we didn't learn anything from today, but we heard that it's like if you love it, buy it.
and then give something else away when you do. So for me, that's part of it, is kind of being in nature and also having nature surround me somewhere in my home or whatever it is, however that bringing that in. Well, I mentioned the buying it thing because for me, I love crystals. I love like furs and plants. And I know there's going to be animal rights out there that are like, furs, what are you talking about? But anything that brings nature closer to me, nature is another one of my non-negotiables. My diet, the way I eat. I don't eat a lot of red meat. I'm a big fish eater, but for me, again, this idea of not forcing our beliefs on anybody else, but just living our own truth of what we need and what we don't need. I am a strong believer that we know based on how our own bodies react to food what's good for us and what's not. I know what I need for my diet, but it's hard for me to explain what that might be for anybody else because it might be different, right? So
Yeah.
that's
No, it's
nutrition, diet, just wrecking. And again, I think it comes from when we eat something, can we actually process how it's making us feel? What
mhm.
kind of state it puts us in? Do we have that kind of relationship with food where there is that? So then it becomes less about like watching what you eat and more about just fueling your body with the things that make you feel integrated and whole.
Yeah, and diet's another thing where it's like just because something may be good for yourself doesn't mean it's necessarily the best thing for somebody else. And just because it was good for you today doesn't mean it's the best thing for you tomorrow or was for you yesterday. If you did a
Yeah.
big workout today, it's like you might be eating different. Your body might need different things than the day before where you just sat on the couch all day or something. But
Right.
so
Right.
I think that's well put. And the next part would be what are you currently working on within entrepreneurship and your practice or your students' practice in yoga and movement? I know you have some upcoming international yoga retreats, one on the Amalfi Coast, and I think in Tanzania in
And
February. And then you're also doing your own yoga teacher training and continual educations. So can you just tell us a little bit more about that and anything else you're working on?
yeah, so right now I think the biggest thing I'm working on is producing from a place of love for what I do. Right. I when I first started Walkabout, and started getting into some of the retreats and trainings and teachings and this and that. And I think as an entrepreneur, and maybe some of your listeners will understand that when you start working for yourself, you're obviously driven by a different set of goals, right? You're your own boss. You've got to push yourself. It becomes a numbers game in some ways. And like, okay, can I even sustain this? Can I afford to survive on what I love to do? And I think it becomes a really slippery slope sometimes. And the pressure that comes with that of, am I still creating from a space of what I love? Or am I creating from a space because I'm afraid of not having enough? So lately for me, that's been really at the forefront of what I'm trying to put out in the world is making sure that it's not coming from a place of lack. And it's coming from a like, no, this is what I'm supposed to, this is what I would do if I was paid nothing for it. Right. And yeah, I have two trainings this fall that one of them's in the United States and Bayfield, Wisconsin at a place called Wild Rice Retreats. I'm so excited about that one because I'm partnered with Robert Sturman. I don't know if you know him, but he is this incredible yoga photographer. You definitely need to have him on the show. Yes, he is a secret yogi as well. And he's just this incredible man and influencer. So we're going to be hosting, and I'll be doing a training, and that training is all about chaos. And I love chaos and transitions on the mat. We always think of yoga as like warrior one or your warrior two or a down dog or chaturanga. But to me, it's about the pieces in between those two poses. Like we're studying a pose and then it's like scramble, scramble, scramble. Okay, we're studying another pose, right? But where do we lose ourselves in that transition in between? And just like in lives, right? Like it's really easy to go from one steady place in life to another steady place in life. But how do we embrace the chaos in between in that limbo state?
Mm.
So that's one of the trainings. And then I have another training in the Grand Cayman with another teacher friend, an advanced teaching training, 30 hours of credit for, again, Grand Cayman in November. But next year, the international ones, the travel ones, and this is another piece of the Walkabout Yoga. Again, my retreats are, yes, they're yoga retreats, some of them the ones that aren't the trainings as well, but they're also about getting out and about in cultures and communities. So the Tanzania one's like a safari yoga retreat, which
Yeah,
I'm
it's got to be
stoked about.
incredible. Have
Yeah,
you been there
so
before?
I have been to Zanzibar, and actually that's what I'm most excited about this retreat with is I'm working with this local friend of mine. I became buddies with him, and this was before I had a yoga travel thing too. And he's this incredible young man, and I'd taken some pictures for him. He runs like a company that kind of it does the driving and gets you from place to place on these different excursions, and they're called Zagas Explorers. And his name's Yusuf. He's amazing, sweet guy. And so he has this local travel company, and I didn't even know he was doing this. And then about 2 years ago, when I started my international retreats, he and I kind of, we were like, oh my God, we have to do something in Africa together. You're a local, company there. I'll bring, the yoga students over and we'll put something together. So this has been a few years in the making, even before I probably knew it was in the making. So that's a safari yoga retreat. And then the Amalfi Coast one that I'm doing in the summer of 2021, we stay with this local Italian family right on the Amalfi Coast. And the family owns the villa. They do the cooking. The mother makes our meals. She can't speak a lick of English. It's awesome. So I've got to learn Italian by then. I've done that one for several years now, and the family's just amazing. The father makes the wine. They have the garden right there that we pick all the vegetables from, and the view straight out over the water. But anyway, enough of those.
Might not be coming back from there. So
yeah, so those are, a lot of it though is, again, like, how do we experience life and take our yoga not just on the mat, but just in every way that we are being ourselves in everything that we do.
yeah, definitely. And then also, that kind of leads into like the future of yoga. I know during this quarantine time and uncertain future, do you see the yoga industry changing in any way? Do you see it resuming how it was?
I do actually in some ways. I have transitioned. I'd been putting off teaching yoga online for a long time, and I recently, in the last month, transitioned to some classes, online donation-based classes, supporting actually some of the local community businesses. One of them being the local yoga studio that closed down, and there's something about online yoga that's great, right? Like, I connect with the students. I've lived all over the world, so it's nice now to see like my students from Germany or my students from all over the United States or wherever. But I think that there's still a piece that's kind of a hurdle for us of that connection. There's something about being in a room with other students and their practices and the combined energy and a community that you create. I think that, yes, there's been this shift to online, and I think that will continue in many ways. But I have a feeling when we're out of quarantine and those studios back up, people are really going to miss that bonding, and that sense of community, and you feel the energy in the room, right? It's, you and I get to see each other right now, but maybe for those of us that are just listening, it's, yes, energy is, and vibrations are, we can sense them in others with their voice and with their body language and everything else. I'm looking at you right now. We can kind of get an idea of each other, but yet there's still something different about if you and I are in the same room with all of your listeners right now, if all of us were hanging out, so much more would be communicated. And so I don't know. I don't
think community too is our vibrations are contagious. So there's just such like importance of community in person, but even if we can get that through virtual connection, kind of like this, also online, people that don't practice yoga regularly, or even if they do practice yoga regularly, they don't realize the amount of resources that are online. And when people are extremely busy with so many other responsibilities, knowing that that's there is extremely beneficial because they can fit that 20-minute practice in before they hop in the shower or while dinner's cooking, where they would not normally been able to pack a bag and go to a yoga studio and then travel back from the yoga studio. They might not have the time every day. So it allows them to practice daily and regularly, which is extremely important. And then when they do have the time, they can create that connection by going to a studio or practicing with the friends or so
I think you're right. I think a lot of the studios now that had jumped on board a long time ago with providing online content, even when they open their doors back up, I bet they all continue to provide that online content for just what you said. The people that can't get into the studio, the people that only have 20 minutes, the people that have kids that need dinner and, homework and all the rest of it. So yeah, I see that as definitely being something. The other thing I see is a lot of people have tried yoga for the first time because they're home and they're hanging out. And I think that this idea of online yoga is much more accessible. Again, like I mentioned with the veteran thing, like nobody can see me, right? Like I'm in a safe space. I can screw up and fall and nobody knows,
You can do it in your
which I think
pajamas,
before,
right?
before prevented a lot of people from trying it. And I've also seen a lot of amazing teachers kind of learn how to connect more and start teaching more. So,
That would
one
be
thing I
good.
know is that they, like you said, community, I think people have a greater appreciation for it. And so I think that's been a gift.
Cool. Yeah, and I know you do a bunch of online live classes, like you did one today, I think at noon, and I'm sure you'll be doing them in the future. Is there anything else you like to talk about or feel that would bring value to the audience?
Gosh, there's for those, I'm guessing that a lot of people that listen have tried yoga maybe, or maybe they haven't, maybe they're curious too, or I would just say keep keep your own practice and study going, right? Like the one thing I just love offering, and I kind of sent you a list, is just books that I've read and that have really opened up my mind and ideas for taking onto the yoga mat with me. So books, resources, teachers, find the teacher you love. If there's a teacher you're not resonating with, that's okay. Like not everybody is meant for everybody else. Like try again, try somewhere else. I just want to say, like, how dare we not, right? Like how dare we not share it? How dare we not share the things that have meant so much to us and offered us so much healing? Like if you're afraid to teach, if you're afraid to share, if you're afraid that your friend's going to make fun of you for doing it, like how dare we not at least just show them who we are in our practice, and if they want to try it, they try it. So
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And like I said, our actions are contagious, and we just make sure those actions are positive. So our actions are positive and our positive actions are contagious. So overall, you can follow Liz, and thank you so much for being on this show, on Instagram at Liz Corwin, on Facebook at Elizabeth Corwin,
yeah.
and by searching for her website, walkaboutyoga.com, which will all be in the show notes below. You also have a YouTube channel, is that right?
I do. Yep. I have a YouTube channel. You can find me there. All that stuff is accessible from the website. A lot of the videos are unlisted on YouTube, but they're donation based. You can find all the links easy to find from the website as well. But then I'd also love to provide a book list for your listeners, maybe that we can
Yeah,
send
yeah,
the
that would be
resources
awesome.
they
Any
can find it
resources you
later.
have.
Just some of my favorite reads, especially right now during quarantine. I think we can always use a little bit more Amazon in our lives delivering books. So.
Yeah, yeah. Any resources you have, we will provide for you, the listener. Take care.
You're doing awesome job. So
Thanks.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining this episode. I hope you loved this conversation. If you're the type of person who has taken action to make life beautiful through the tools of yoga, I'd really appreciate if you headed over to iTunes and left us a raving review to keep this show going. Every review is read by myself, the host, and your feedback will most definitely be taken into account for future episodes. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Have an extraordinary rest of your day, and remember, our actions and thoughts are contagious, so make them good ones.